Welcome to Beyond Belief, Finding Unity Through Faith, a podcast brought to you by the Stanislaus County Interfaith Council. Join us as we embark on a journey to explore the rich diversity of faiths, belief systems, and spiritual traditions from around the world. In each episode, we engage in open-hearted conversations with individuals from various religious backgrounds, seeking not only to understand their unique practices and teachings, but also to uncover the common threads that bind us all together. By focusing on what unites us, Beyond Belief fosters a deeper sense of empathy, connection, and shared humanity, reminding us that beyond our differences, we are all seeking meaning, purpose, and peace. Join us as we bridge divides and find unity through faith.
Hello, and welcome to the Stanislaus County Interfaith Council podcast, Beyond Belief, Finding Unity Through Faith. We're very happy to be here today. I'm here with my co-host, Patrick Rhodes, and we're fortunate to have with us today as our guest, Rabbi Caitlin Bromberg. We're happy to have a little discussion with her to find out more about her and her beliefs. I'm happy to be a member of the Stanislaus County Interfaith Council. Our rabbi here is a member of that as well. And I certainly enjoy that because it builds relationships and friendships, and we think that's something that's very much needed in our world today. Just a little bit about me. I just retired from practicing law. I've lived in Modesto 50 years and practiced law in 50 years, and now I'm retired and happy to have this new little project to keep me going and keep me busy. So that's a little bit about me. Pat?
Hi. I've lived in Modesto since 1993 and have been practicing medicine since that time and grown very accustomed to being here. And I'm grateful to be here as well.
Okay, Rabbi, well, it's nice to have you here.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your faith journey?
Of course, I'd be happy to. I was not born Jewish. I was raised Catholic, and I converted to Judaism. I became interested in Judaism as an adolescent at about the age of 12. And so it was kind of bubbling in the back of my mind for a long time. I converted when I was 26. And the discovery of Judaism was reading books about Judaism and getting this feeling of identification, this feeling of kind of a light going on. And gee, that kind of feels like me, or I kind of feel like I belong there. And one of the things I liked about what was different was the theology, which was a very direct relationship with God. And in Catholicism, I was brought up with, Jesus and Mary and God and the saints, and this, sort of a broader sense of, who is that person you might be addressing in prayer. And I really liked that one-on-one with God. So that was one of the things that attracted me. And so I was a convert, and as you know, converts are very passionate. And I just wanted to keep learning. And 13 years after I converted, I found myself in seminary. I've gone to seminary twice. My first clergy position was as a cantor, and I went to seminary for that in New York.
What is a cantor?
A cantor is a member of the Jewish clergy who specializes in the chanting of the Hebrew liturgy. In a traditional synagogue, lead the prayers. The prayers are led by a cantor who is very specially trained in the ancient musical notation. So we can look at a Hebrew text that has all these sort of squiggles on it, and we know how to read the music. So we're trained not only in the language, but in this ancient way of adding chant. And, we're specialists in areas that the rabbis are not. The rabbis are specialists in Jewish law, and we're the specialists in prayer.
So how did you become from a cantor to become a rabbi? How did that happen to you?
Some of it was just how life happens. As you know, all houses of worship and faith traditions have had a falling off of people who attend. And I was in the New York area, and some of it was, the economic times. It was just after 2008, and synagogues were getting smaller. And in my denomination, conservative Judaism, that was the one sort of hardest hit by that. And in conservative Judaism, a lot of the lay people know how to lead prayers. So the jobs for cantors started to disappear. And although I had a wonderful job at my congregation in New Jersey, at a certain point, they were not able to keep me. And when any congregation gets to that point, who are they going to keep? The rabbi.
So the lack of resources played a big part.
Yeah, that played a part. Although I had always, even from when I went to cantorial school, I was attracted to the rabbinic side of things. I've always been someone who was intellectual, interested in the academics, interested in philosophy and theology, and but I'm also an artist. I have both sides, and you have to make a choice. So, but it was always kind of there that I loved that part of Judaism. And one of the things that can happen in a cantor-rabbi relationship, and I had the best cantor-rabbi relationships, I'm very grateful. But even then, you're sort of the singing head. So the rabbi is, really setting the tone spiritually, really creating the the ambiance and the spirituality. Now we create spirituality with our voices, and embrace people with that. But I never got to say, this prayer means this, and the reason I'm singing it this way is because I want to express this particular part of the prayer. So I never got a chance to talk about the prayers. And I wanted to do that too. So I'd always had an interest. And then at the point where, the world was changing in terms of cantors and rabbis, the rabbinical jobs were still there. And I really, a number of things in my faith life have really seemed to have God's hand, because every time there was a situation where there was some kind of, loss or decision to be made, I fell into exactly the right thing. And it showed up at exactly the right time. And when I left my congregation in New Jersey, a colleague of mine said, well, there's this conservative synagogue, this little synagogue in Western New Jersey, and they don't have a rabbi and they need an interim. And I said, well, I know what to do. So I got hired for a year as an interim rabbi, spiritual leader, not actually, but fulfilling the rabbinical role, but not using that title. And after that happened again. I moved out to San Diego, and I was there for about 6 months. I was teaching Hebrew school. I was doing some freelance things. And then I got an email from the president of a conservative congregation in the, sort of eastern part of the county, who said, we're looking for an interim rabbi, and you were recommended by our rabbi who's leaving. And I didn't know him that well, but when I got into town, I went around and met everyone, right? You network. And he just gave them my name, and I had another full-time rabbinical job. And in between, I was doing a lot of weddings, a lot of the sort of freelance clergy life cycle events. And more people were just calling me rabbi. And that's what I was doing. So it felt a little bit like a natural progression. But I also wasn't really legally entitled to the title rabbi.
What do you have to do to become a rabbi? What qualifications are required?
Well, it is another seminary degree. And it's more academic than musical. It's now, when I went back to seminary, I had a lot of credits from my original seminary, and I didn't have to take the class on how to do a wedding. There were classes I didn't need to take, but I needed to take Talmud and, Tanakh, which for us is the whole Hebrew scriptures, delve more into it, delve into commentaries, and also some of it's about the pastoral role. And cantors do fill that role, but not consistently. It's sort of when they're needed. And so I did, the chaplaincy training and, was in a lot of, classes on, trauma and, the various things that can happen to people where they need a spiritual presence.
When did you become a rabbi?
In last May.
Oh, really? Yeah.
A year ago, just about exactly a year ago.
And how long have you been in Modesto now?
Close to a year.
Awesome.
This is my first job. It's my first job out of seminary.
How's it going?
It's going well, and I really like Modesto.
You did good.
I really do. There's a lot about it that, it's kind of this hidden gem. People from outside, just go, oh, Modesto, and they don't know anything. And the culture here, the involvement of the community, it amazes me how everyone's involved in the arts and culture. It's like everybody's going to the symphony. Everybody's going to the opera, and everybody, it's like everybody cares and shows up for things, So there's a lot about Modesto that I like. And obviously this is I'm not, 35 years old, but it is my first rabbinical job. So I'm in a learning curve.
Well, congratulations.
But I have a lot of support.
Congratulations. So the congregation you have is Congregation Beth Shalom?
Yes.
Did I say that right?
Yes, you did.
What does that mean, Beth Shalom?
Beth, or Bait, means house.
And
House
Shalom?
of peace.
House of peace.
Wow.
I like that.
Yeah.
Very good. And so explain during the week what services you have and what happens there. I know that your Sabbath is from Friday night to Saturday night. Do you have any other services during the week, or is that the main one, or what?
We don't usually have services during the week unless there's a holiday. And Jewish holidays can fall on weekdays, and they often do. But otherwise, the week is more about study and about working with the community, about planning. A lot of work on, if I'm going to be doing a holiday program, and right now I'm doing a holiday program in about 10 days for what you would call Pentecost, and we call it Shavuot. I need to do some teaching, and I have to prepare the material and work with my administrators and my lay people. And a lot of it's, about running the business of a synagogue. But there's a lot, and there's Torah study. There's, ways in which you do sort of keep that religious energy going. But we don't have formal services during the week, at least at our synagogue. An Orthodox synagogue does.
So do you do counseling during the week or anything? The members of your congregation come in to talk to you about either spiritual things or maybe family issues and things like that?
Yes, that is my role. I haven't had a lot of that yet because I'm still getting to know people. But that is definitely part of what the rabbi's available for. I do, on some of the days that I'm focusing on pastoral, I go out and visit people who are homebound, give them the connection. And when I visit someone who's sick, whether it's in their home or in the hospital, we do have a liturgy. We have prayers for healing, and I will chant them in the hospital room, and it's a kind of singing, and I say prayers for the family, and so there's a liturgical piece of that.
You do that in Hebrew, English, or what?
Hebrew. Mm-hmm. And then I usually translate it. I sing it in Hebrew, and then I say what this means is, may the one who who blessed our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, please bless and heal this person. And you give their name. You say their Hebrew name if they have one, or, whatever their name is. And then, it continues, may the Holy One give you complete and perfect healing, speedily and soon, healing of soul and healing of body. That's a really big piece of our understanding of healing, is that it's both.
So what happens on the Sabbath day, your Sabbath day?
Well, Friday night, there is a service. And Friday night, just for a moment, I'll just say something about how Judaism is structured, which is that the synagogue is only half of where Judaism is practiced. Judaism is practiced in the home. And the home rituals are very important. And so at your home on Friday night, you will light the Sabbath candles. You will say a blessing over wine. You will bless the children. And you say a blessing over the challah bread. And then you have a meal with the family. And it's also traditional to talk. Of course, it's about family time. But it's also about study. So you might talk about something in Judaism. And in a lot of traditional homes, they've got a book on the table and they're studying Torah, So that people, do a Shabbat dinner at home and they come to synagogue. Some people don't, some do, but that is a whole observance of Shabbat, includes both. In the synagogue, we have a service that's about an hour and a half long. And it has two parts. One is a sort of a warm-up, with psalms and different prayers that kind of get you into a spiritual place. And then we have sort of the formal required prayers there. And afterward, like in most houses of worship, we have some fellowship, and we will also bless the wine and the bread at the synagogue. The tradition of that is in a lot of the ancient communities and communities in Europe, over the modern period. A lot of times the synagogue would be where travelers would stay, and they would be housed there. And so one of the reasons you do the blessings there is because that person wouldn't have been in a home. And you are providing for them as well. So even if you've done it at home, you do it again. So that's Friday night. Saturday morning is a longer service. In traditional synagogues, it can be as much as 3 hours long and longer. And some, if there's a holiday, if there's some special observances, a holiday for which there is an additional book of the prophets that you have to study, or, in our synagogue, it's generally 2 hours and change. And it consists of 3 parts, really. There is a morning service, which starts again with psalms and ways of just sort of connecting spiritually and finding yourself. A lot of prayers about, the blessings of the morning and light. And then we start the formal prayers. And then after the morning prayers, we have the Torah service. We take out the Torah scroll on Saturday morning. We don't usually take it out on Friday night. So there is a service where we bring the Torah out of the ark and we walk in procession, and then we, lay it down and we open it, and then people chant from the Torah. There are 7 different sections that are chanted, and there are people who are reading it, and then there are also people who are invited up to bless each reading. So there's a lot of choreography going on. There's really a lot going on. And then after the 7 sections of the Torah, then there's a tradition of lifting the Torah scroll and turning around so that the congregation can see the Hebrew letters. You need strong people for that, but it's quite beautiful. And then you roll it up and you redress it and put the ornaments on, but you leave it out, because if the Torah's out, God's a little closer. So you put it over on the side. You don't put it away yet. And then you say prayers for healing. You'll say other things that where you want God to really hear. And then there's a third section, which is another section of required prayers with concluding prayers.
Sorry to interrupt you. But
Sure. Well, it's long.
For people who may not know, though, the Torah is what?
The Torah, Torah is the scroll of the Hebrew scriptures, and the way it is made is exactly the way it was made 2,000 years ago. It is a scroll made of parchment, and the parchment, obviously, parchment's in pieces. So it's sewn together in a very special way. Everything that goes into making a Torah is some kind of natural substance. So it has to be sewn with catgut. And then the scroll is on 2 rollers. So you've got it rolled on each end, because when you're in the book of Genesis, you've got all this rolled over here. You've got a big roll, and then you're right at the beginning over here. Right now we're in the book of Leviticus, and it's even, because that's the middle.
So the Torah then is the what we might call in other religions the Old Testament?
No, it's not the whole Old Testament.
It's the
it is
first
the
5 books.
first 5 books.
The Pentateuch or something like that.
Pentateuch, yeah.
That's how you say it.
So we call it the Chumash. Chamesh is the number 5 in Hebrew. And so it's the first 5 books. And it
How
is
do
all.
you feel
it's all-
about the other books in the Old Testament?
Many of those books are also part of our whole Hebrew scriptures. The Hebrew scriptures have 3 sections. And first one is the Torah. And then there's the prophets. That's a big section. And then the third section is called writings. And it has all the things like the book of Esther, the book of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Job, book of Jonah, all those additional books that have like a particular place. They're either wisdom literature or some kind of narrative.
Do you consider all of those books sacred writings?
Oh, absolutely. They're all canonized.
They are, okay. Mm-hmm. And then you have the Talmud. Mm-hmm. And then you have, I wrote this down, the Mishnah.
The Mishnah.
And then you have the Midrash and the Siddur.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So I don't know
very
what,
good.
I know what the Talmud is sort of. That's what the interesting one to me is, because that's a commentary and debate about various theological issues, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And that's where you go to really get deep into the issue.
As a lawyer, you would like that.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think I would.
Yes. A lot of lawyers love learning about Jewish law, and Jewish law is a foundation of. There are a lot of very interesting pieces of Jewish law that are very interesting. The rules of evidence are very complex, other things, but that's another conversation. The chronology is that it's the Torah, and then and then the Tanakh, which is Tanakh is the whole Hebrew scriptures, and it's an acronym. We have a lot of acronyms. T is for Torah, N is for Nevi'im, which is the word for prophets. And the third one is Ketuvim, and Ketav is the word for write. So it's, the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. And so you take each of those letters and you have Tanakh. So that's the whole Hebrew scriptures.
Oh. And that's
then,
all considered sacred writings?
Oh, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And what is the Talmud considered? Is
Okay.
it considered a sacred writing? Or?
It is considered sacred, yes. It doesn't have quite the same status, but yes. And the Mishnah actually comes between the Tanakh and the Talmud.
I got a note here. It says Mishnah is oral laws. Is that?
The Mishnah and the Talmud have to do with oral law.
Okay.
And the Mishnah is the first time that someone tried to codify the laws that are in the Torah. Because all the laws in the Torah, they show up in lots of different places. They come in different stories. They, and then a lot of them are repeated in Deuteronomy. So they come, maybe a lot of them are in the book of Exodus. The book of Leviticus is all about the priests and the temple. Every single piece of it is about ritual law. So, but what the writers of the Mishnah did was pull the laws out and categorize them, and created a 6-volume work that has agricultural laws. It has torts and damages. It has marital laws. It has, and it's by the section and the content. And so you need that in order to observe Jewish law, because you could look forever to find it in the Torah. Because,
So is the Mishnah considered a sacred writing then?
I would say it's considered sacred.
Okay.
The Mishnah and the Talmud have a sense of sacredness about them. And the rabbis who wrote them are very revered. They're called the sages. So then the Talmud is a commentary on the Mishnah.
Oh, okay.
So the Mishnah is a commentary on the Torah, and the Talmud is also a commentary on the Torah, but it incorporates the Mishnah. So every section of Talmud has a section of Mishnah, and it usually starts with a quote from the Torah. And then the Talmud takes that and expands it and
Dissects it.
dissects it. And also the reason we need oral law is that the Torah is not really specific about how to do these things. It says, okay, it's the Sabbath, you can't light a fire. Well, what does that really mean? Does that mean you sit in the dark and eat cold food for 24 hours? No, because the Sabbath is also joy. So there are the oral law handed down, how you actually do that. You light candles before, you cook some things in advance, you keep them in a warm oven, but you're supposed to have joy of your family. And so that's what it means. And that came down in the oral law. So that's what's written in the Mishnah and the Talmud. It's a combination of the oral and the written law.
Oh, thank you. That clears a lot up for me. I appreciate that.
Well, let me just ask one. So you said before that the Mishnah was kind of between the Torah and the Talmud.
Yes.
In a sense, did you mean in sacredness, so to speak?
No,
maybe closer
chronologically.
to the fount, okay.
Chronologically, and also in terms of the development, because it's the first codification of law, but it's kind of straightforward, like a legal code. And then there's the commentary on the code, but all rabbinic writings are all commentary on the Torah.
Okay.
They all go back to a verse of the Torah, whatever they're discussing.
Okay. Thank you. That's interesting. So let's shift for a minute to Abraham, which is kind of where your religion starts, isn't it?
Yes.
And do you have what's called an Abrahamic covenant? Have you heard of that term?
Well, yes. The initial covenant with Abraham is from the book of Genesis, and that was a covenant of sacrifice. And it involved, you probably read this section, it's very sort of mysterious where, Abraham, sacrifices all these animals, and then he walks between them. And that's one of the ways that he goes into the covenant. And the covenant is also Brit Milah, which is circumcision. So that is what Abraham does, and he circumcises Isaac on the 8th day, and that is where our tradition of how we do circumcision comes from. That's the initial covenant.
So let me ask you about that, right?
Yeah.
The circumcision, is that still something that's done in all Judaism? Or, you've mentioned before Orthodox, conservative.
Yes, there are denominations.
And then Reform?
Yes, Reform.
Are those generally the three?
Generally.
Can you tell us about each one? So you said, I think you mentioned earlier, you belong to the conservative.
Yes.
So what is the Orthodox? Briefly, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but Orthodox and then the conservative and the Reform. Can you just kind of give us a broad outline?
It has to do with their relationship to Jewish law. There's a very basic way to understand it, and that is that the Orthodox are extremely strict on Jewish law. They consider themselves bound by it and bound to God in that, and their law changes very slowly if it changes at all. They tend to keep, the old law, and they don't want to change it. It's very, very sort of static and monolithic. The relationship of the conservative movement to halakha is that they do consider themselves bound by halakha, but
What's
that halakha, I'm sorry, halakha means Jewish law.
Okay.
I apologize.
That's okay.
Yeah. So they're bound by Jewish law, but they believe Jewish law can be changed. And they use a system that's very similar to the rabbis of the Talmud, where they debate changes in the law. That's how they came up with how to ordain women and various other things that are in a relationship with our values today, values that weren't shared by the Bible. But they don't make these changes unless they can find support for it in the text. So they can spend years working on one decision, but then there will be a decision. The decisions, you'll appreciate that as a lawyer, the decisions are always published with 3 different papers. One is the sort of central one that most people are going to follow, and the 2 others are dissenting opinions. They are other papers that might have been chosen, and they all are valid, but they're
There's one that governs.
they're the minor opinions.
Yeah. I think
It's kind of like the Supreme Court, I would assume.
Exactly, very much. I mean, where do you think they figured out how to do it?
Yeah, exactly.
But the Reform movement, their relationship to Jewish law.
This is the third one.
Yeah, this is the third one, and they are the most progressive and less observant, although they take their Judaism very seriously. But their way of looking at it is that each person has personal autonomy in choosing how they're going to observe. And they are required to study. They need to know what it is before they decide, well, this is how I'm going to observe the Sabbath, because this is what is holy to me. And they see the Jewish law, the Talmud, all of that, they see it as a sacred resource, but they don't consider themselves bound by it. So that's a kind of quick way of understanding the difference.
Yeah. So does each different, the Orthodox, Conservative, and the Reform, do they each have a different perception of God, a different view of God, or is it the same between all of them?
It's the same.
Could you explain to us what that is, the view of God in your
Of course,
faith?
yeah. So it is primarily a very profound kind of monotheism, and God is one. God is everything, but God is one. The whole universe is God, but God is this unity, this oneness. God presents their God self in many different ways in the Torah. There are actually 70 different names for God. And actually, there are probably more because they, haven't found them all yet. One of them is 42 letters. So some of it's very mystical. So, God is sometimes called the Rock of Israel, or the sacred place, like, a space. The well of blessing, So there are many different names for God, but God is one. There is a feeling of God's energy flowing into different qualities and characteristics of what God's nature is, and also that is seen as something that a human would aspire to. Like part of God flows into a container that's called chesed, which means loving kindness. So this aspect of God is about loving kindness.
The characteristics of a God.
Yeah, it's characteristics,
Okay.
and there are 10 of those.
Okay.
And so that's another way of understanding God's sort of expansiveness. So God is both immanent and sort of intimate, so God is huge, and God is also personal.
So God is all powerful.
Yes.
And all merciful.
I would say yes, absolutely.
All right. And all knowing.
I would say, the omnipotence, definitely that's a part of it. And the all-powerful, the all-knowing, and the source of creation, the creator.
How does your view of God in your faith affect people at a practical level? I mean, how does it affect their lives?
Interesting. It's an interesting question.
Do you have I know, for example, I imagine the Ten Commandments is pretty basic to your belief, right?
Of course, that's the first 10 of 613.
Right. So there's all these laws that you believe came from God, right? Mm-hmm. And what do you call these 613 laws?
They're called commandments.
The commandments.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So does the commandments grow over time from 613, or do they remain the same?
They remain the same, but they are always required to be interpreted in every generation.
Gotcha.
In the context of the present.
Yes. Even the rabbis of the Talmud, they already did not think a lot of things in the Bible were really moral according to their sense of ethics and morals. So they found a way to continue to have a relationship with it as a sacred text, but also to find a way, for example, so that some of the capital crimes would never be, that there would never be an execution, because, we don't believe, that, when your son is rebellious, that you should stone him in the marketplace.
So it sounds like maybe you have a core principle, and then there's exceptions to the principle. Is that
It's the way it is understood. There's, I believe it's in Deuteronomy. There's a section that says, the law is not far from you. It is not over the ocean. It is not over the mountains. It is not far away. It is right here. It's with you. And the way that's interpreted is that the law is that it's supposed to be, you're supposed to be able to practice it without, without it being impossible, without it being beyond what a human can do in terms of, asceticism or piety or, following these, sort of strict things. So that gives a container for saying something like, those ideas about the Sabbath, where, okay, we're not allowed to light a fire, but how are we going to have, and the other wonderful debate is, what does work mean? What does it mean that you're not supposed to work? So I would say, from the outside, it can look like wiggle room or loopholes, but what it's really about is a compassionate approach to allowing you to observe the law without it being so extreme that it's beyond, human ability.
Oh, that's interesting. So sounds like maybe it's the law, but then you apply love to the law.
You apply love. Compassion and justice are both really important principles. The principles of the Talmud are, that law is very important, but there's more than the law. There is, and this is very true of our legal system, a judge has the range to make, within the range of the verdict, a range of what punishment to apply, what to do, to dismiss, to let someone off with a fine because, they are needy, So there's that room for the idea, the true justice may not be exactly what the law says.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah.
And that's how it is pretty much in the legal system, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sometimes not done really well, but they try.
It's the intention, that you have respect for both the letter and the spirit of the law.
Right.
Is there a central organization with, for each, version of Judaism, or for Judaism as a whole? Is there like a head rabbi or a head prophet, or I have a feeling there's not, but What got you to come from New Jersey to here? Was it, well, there's an opening here, or did somebody send you here, or you understand what I'm saying?
Understand, yeah, because I know that's how many Christian denominations work. The reason I moved back to San Diego was because I was in that transition between being a cantor and a rabbi, and that's where my family is. And it was a soft place to land while I was going through a career change. So I came home. And then I went to rabbinical school at a Los Angeles school where we could go hybrid. Actually, they were hybrid before the pandemic. And so then
hybrid, you mean online and
online and in person. Okay. Actually, the last few years, they've pretty much only been online because it just, it made sense. That seminary exists to make it possible for people who are in a later stage of life, who can't just drop everything and go to a legacy seminary, people who already have careers, who have families, to not have to leave home. I mean, my fellow rabbinical students were from, Illinois and New York and, even from England.
Wow.
So, but in answer to your question, the denominations, some of them have a stronger central body, and others, the Orthodox, have a number of central bodies within a particular region. So, like say in Baltimore or New York, there might be a head rabbi. And that head rabbi would be in charge of all the kosher laws and, making all these things work. And the other rabbis would, consult with that head rabbi. In conservative Judaism, there is one organization called the United Synagogues of Conservative Judaism. It's central. And the Reform movement has the Union for Reform Judaism. So both of those have a central body. But for the most part, the relationship to the clergy, it does not involve sending people. You're responsible for looking for your job. So it's very much like, more of a sort of standard career.
Okay, thank you.
We'd never asked, are you married or single? Do you have children? Any of that kind of stuff?
I am divorced, and I have a son who is living here with me in his mid-30s.
So there's no restriction. A rabbi can be single or married? Mm-hmm. No celibacy type of thing then?
Oh, no. Actually, you're pretty much required to have a family and have, a complete married life. It's
because Judaism is really, as you said, primarily about the family.
It's about the family, and it's also about all of the joyful things that God has given us. It has a very different, sort of more earthy way of looking at sexuality and eating and drinking, and that's something we do on our festivals, and
well, I've been to 3 bar mitzvahs, and they're fun.
Yeah. So the pleasures of the body are as holy as everything. So there have been rabbis over the centuries who did live a sort of ascetic lifestyle, but they were never the mainstream, and the normative communities discouraged it. It's not really seen as being a complete Jewish life in some ways.
So, what is the view of your afterlife? All the same.
They're pretty much the same.
And what is that view?
Well, it's very simple. Our understanding of the soul is based on the story of the creation of Adam in Genesis, which is that God breathes it into us. And when we die, that soul goes back to God. We don't have an incredibly detailed view of what the afterlife is like. And it's really based on conversations between the rabbis in the time of the Talmud. And basically they said to each other, have you been there? I haven't been there. Why should we make up what it looks like? We don't know how many angels are by God. We think it's maybe a big yeshiva where you get to study Torah forever, but basically they pull back from creating a detailed view of the afterlife. we know that we go back to God and that the soul is eternal. And, there are, ideas like mostly that, perhaps you will see your loved ones, but it's not as complex and developed as many other religions.
Where you end up after this life, is it dependent on your actions? We've had some interesting conversations with this, specifically the Hindu, and talking about karma and how you live many lives. And, you might need just a little bit more to get to nirvana. So God will put you into a fly that lives 18 days so you can pick up that last little bit. And just things like that. I guess I don't want to say, is there a heaven and hell? Does everybody go to the same place? We're all spirits. We all go back to God.
Yeah. One of the prayers we do at the bedside of someone who is, in sort of imminent end of life, we do have prayers just like, the Catholics have the prayer for the sick, the anointing of the sick.
Last rites.
And and it's a confession. It's, where you talk about, that I didn't do everything right and I hope God forgives me. And you say certain prayers which have to do with asking for forgiveness. So that's part of it. And the belief, which isn't held by everyone, it's kind of more like a folk belief in the way our mourning practices are based on it, which is that the first 11 months after someone dies, that they're in a period of being judged. And their soul is, they're being judged. And one of the reasons we say the Kaddish, the mourner's prayer, so often during that time is because we're helping them. We're giving them strength. We're sending them, this spiritual love. But basically, there isn't any other place. You are responsible. You're responsible for your sins. But there isn't any punishment or hell. There's a period of repentance of the soul. And it might be longer for some people.
After that period of time, whether it be 11 months or whatever the time is, then you go back into the presence of God, regardless of how you lived your life here?
Well, generally, I think there is this understanding that, there may be people who need a longer period of repentance. And that's the point at which we set the headstone. We don't set the stone until the 11 months are up. So we do the burial at the time, but we set the stone after 11 months.
Now, do they have to be buried within a certain amount of time after they die?
Yes. It's supposed to be, very traditional, would, try to do it within, 24 hours. It's usually, 36 or so. There are times now in modern times when families live all over the place that it may be a few days longer for people to get somewhere. And then, the mortuary refrigerates the body because we don't embalm.
Right.
And then, you might have the funeral a little bit later. But it is supposed to be done, I would say, within 3 days is kind of the norm.
I've spoken with Jewish friends of mine over the years, and I remember one of them said, I just want to get your take on this, that
Sure.
He said, I don't believe in God, but I'm Jewish because I'm from the Jewish culture. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense to you?
Totally.
Can you explain that?
Yeah. Judaism is more than a religion. Judaism is a life. It is a culture. It's a way of life. And the principles of that way of life have to do with justice and compassion. And it is it's there. You can even explain it in ways beyond that. But it's one of the ways that one of the great rabbis describes it is it's a civilization. It's this wide range. It's a worldview. It's a way of understanding time. It's the cycle of the festivals puts you in touch with the cosmos because it's both solar and lunar. And you can have a profound relationship with any of those things. And if you're someone who brings home flowers on Friday night and never says a prayer, you're still a Jew. You're still a valid Jew.
And you can go through all of the rites and so you
Yeah,
don't necessarily
yeah.
have to believe in God to be
Not necessarily. I mean, in a sort of rational,
Cultural way.
in this in terms of your sort of mental idea of the existence of God, there are many Jews who will say that.
what my friend said.
That they're culturally Jewish. They'll say, "Well, I'm not really religious," but if you start asking them, they're like, "Well, I have a Passover Seder, and I observe Hanukkah," and that's true of all the secular Israelis for the most part. I mean, the majority of Israelis are not religious, but they do all those things. They have a Sabbath dinner. They do all these, and they enjoy them, and they sing the songs, and they do all the things, and they have all the beautiful candlesticks and all the ritual items, and they make it very special.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
What is the Jewish view of Jesus and Muhammad? The other two Abrahamic faiths, if you will.
Sure.
What is your view of the other two, at least, not going in any further than that, but
Sure,
Jesus
okay.
and Muhammad?
Yeah. Well, Jesus is written about in the Talmud. He's there. He was a rabbi. He, all those things that, you've heard of, him going to the temple and confronting the corruption. A lot of other rabbis were doing that. The rabbinic community that he was part of was the Pharisees. That was the Pharisees were the ones who were not the priests of the temple. And the Pharisees were the ones who created the religion of the Torah and of prayer and of synagogue, which, pulled away from the temple sacrificial cult. And the temple was very corrupt at that time. So Jesus is there. He's written about. He interacts with some of the great famous rabbis. I don't know if there's something specific about it, but he probably studied with some of them. So he's a real person who lived, who was a rabbi, someone of great holiness. I don't know. A lot of people sort of say prophet, but I would say it's really more of a sense of a great rabbi.
Okay.
Or, someone who was within the rabbinic community. But he was also a rebel, He was definitely a troublemaker.
He was definitely a rebel. So
yeah.
How about Muhammad? Is this the same?
Well, Muhammad is much later.
680 or something.
Yeah. So we're in a very different time in the history of the world. The Jews are, fully in a diaspora. They're in many different countries. They are, in many different, they're under lots of different rulers. They're, they're in, Iraq, and, they're in Istanbul, and they're in South America, and they're in Japan, and they're, China. There was a Chinese Jewish community, very ancient one. So a lot of it, the best way to answer any Jewish question is with three questions, which is, which Jews, where, and when? Then I can answer your question. Well, how do you observe the Sabbath? Well, which Jews, where, and when? So the relationship with Islam was at times very positive, and they were very intermingled culturally. I don't really know about a sort of theological view of Muhammad. I think he's just, he's considered a charismatic, spiritual leader, okay. I would say.
So what things do you sort of wish that people better understood about the Jewish faith? what are some misconceptions out there, or maybe just the question is, what is it you wish that Christians and Hindus and other religious beliefs maybe better understood about your faith? If you can answer that.
Yeah. Well, there two of the ancient sources of anti-Semitism are two references that are made to Jews in the Gospels. I believe Matthew is one of them, and one of them says that the Jews killed Jesus, and the other one says that, and one are, they consort with the devil. And that was really the source, of the original ideas of, Jews being, something evil, something strange. What do I want people to know? I think I want them to know there is a perception that the Torah, the Hebrew scriptures are about a God of judgment and anger and punishment, and that the New Testament and the religion of Jesus is the one of love. And I want people to know how much love there is in Judaism. It is, as I said, loving kindness is a foundation. And our mission in the world is to make the world a better place. That's one of the reasons that we're not really too concerned with the afterlife, because that's not what we're working toward. Our understanding is that we're partners with God in the renewing creation each day, and that we're supposed to be moving the world toward greater justice and compassion. And so that is a concept we call tikkun olam, which means repairing or healing the world.
I've heard that,
Yeah. So that's really the foundation, and that's what the Jewish people who, connect with, theology, but it's also about social justice and economic justice and sort of advancing many things that have to do with love and compassion. And so I think, there have been a lot of Christian scholars over the years who have, and the Pope did this not too long ago, who have apologized to the Jews for the anti-Semitism and for accusing them of having killed Jesus, because it's not really that they didn't have the power, so this idea of being, Christ killers or satanic or something like that, that's one of the most damaging and dangerous aspects of what people think of Jews. I don't think a lot of that is so prevalent now, but I think there are people who believe that.
Well, I think I think in a way you may be wrong, because I've heard a lot of people say that. Friends of mine that you wouldn't think were prejudiced, but older.
Yeah.
But I don't care. They killed they killed Jesus. And
Yeah.
I was like, gosh, how do you say that? Mm-hmm. I do feel, and I don't know if that most people that look at the Old Testament as, or God in the Old Testament as being mean or vengeful or something, haven't really read it. I mean, it's real easy to objectify something that you don't know anything about. And
there is a lot of that, but there's a lot of there are some wonderful, loving scenarios, like the way God treats Moses after he forgives the people for the golden calf. And Moses says, "I want to see your face." And God says, "Well, no one can see my face and live, but I'm going to place you in this cleft in the rock where you will be safe, and I will pass before you, and you'll be able to see my back." So God is, just lovingly places Moses in this safe place where he won't be damaged by God's, huge, force of nature. But God does give him as much intimacy as he possibly can. And it's just beautiful, loving scene. And that's after, breaking the commandments and the golden calf, and those are some of the worst things, But there's a lot of beautiful times in the, in the Torah of God being forgiving and,
Yeah, but, in the writings of Psalms and Proverbs, and Job and Ruth, and those are all very loving stories.
Yeah,
loving quotes and so forth.
Yeah,
And I do think that people take them out of context of the time
of course.
and the civilization back then and try and put them in today's, like, well, I don't know, maybe it's political. I think they do that today with our old history and, with slavery and things like that. I'm not by any means pro-slavery, but, our founding fathers, some of them had slaves. That's just what people did back then. I was just in...
Yeah, I think it's called presentism, where you...
Oh,
you,
interesting.
You
I hadn't heard that.
You judge today people in the past by today's standards, and there's a word called presentism where you can't really do that. They lived at a different time, different age, different knowledge, different context, and everything else. So it's, Well, it's been really fun. I have a lot more questions, but we better wrap it up. Let me see.
While you're looking up back east, do you miss certain things that they don't have here that they might have in back east? Well, there's more Jews. This is a dumb example, but man, before I went to New York City, I never really appreciated how great a bagel can be.
Oh, yeah.
I'm New York City. The ones in the supermarket were a million times better than the ones you buy here at the fancy bagel place.
Yep.
It's just like, and that's silly, but I mean,
no,
as far
it's not, because like I said, Jews and food, it's kind of a meme, but New York and, some of the other big cities, developed this, Ashkenazi, this Eastern European cuisine, and there are a lot of, reasons why, it has to do with the water, it has to do with all these different things, but they don't taste the same anywhere else.
I think, going back to what we were talking about earlier, I don't believe in a God that hates. I don't believe in a God who punishes. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and that's my belief system. I'm not asking anyone to agree with me, but I just don't believe in a God who hates or who doesn't love. And I have a difficult time with any kind of faith or type of belief that propagates hate. I just don't think that's how the God of the universe, whether we call the God, Jehovah, Yahweh.
Those are our unpronounceable names.
They are.
We're not supposed to pronounce them.
Trying.
Yeah.
Or Allah, but I mean, one thing that seems like Pat and I have determined after many podcasts with different faiths, really, there's not that much difference between the various faiths. And when it comes right down to it, it seems that everyone's trying to make a connection with God. And they do it in different ways. But it seems like there's just something about us as human beings that wants a connection with God. No matter no matter what we call that God or how we view that God, we want a connection with that God.
Yeah, it's those basic questions. Why am I here?
Where am I going?
What is life? Why is there death? All those. And there's a path to at least having, some kind of wisdom around that. But I think that's certainly true. I had a minor in anthropology, and I'm fascinated by ancient culture. And one of the first things that archaeologists find that tell them that there was a developed civilization is that they find graves, that people honored their dead, that they had a ritual, that they had some kind of belief and importance. So, those things, it's about these bedrock things of being human and the questions we all have.
One final question.
Yeah.
We could go on forever here, but I don't want to keep you too long. And so I've asked this question in all the podcasts, and it's been so interesting to ask this question. But basically, what would your God say to the world right now in one or two sentences?
Oh, my children, you've got it so wrong. Oh, yeah. And I think, what I'm thinking about is the hate and the climate change and all the things that are, the plagues of this world that we're in. And that, I never meant for my sacred writings to be used against people. I never meant for, it's...
I've heard that called using canon for canon.
Interesting. Yeah.
But I'm sorry.
Canon for canon. I get it. I get it.
As canon.
Canon as canon. Yeah, yeah.
I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Yes. No, that's fine. But and I also, I was just, reading this today. This week's Torah portion has one of these sections where after, 47 curses, God says, but if you repent, I'm here for you. I'll never not be here for you. So I think that's, I think that's one of the things that, God might say.
I totally concur with that. I think God loves us, and He'll do almost anything He can to get us back to Him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We have some responsibility there, but His arms are always open as far as I believe. So, well, this has been really fascinating.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
It's been really fun.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for coming.